Hi, this is a quick post about Black people unmuting their voices and why it's particularly important at this time. Uh, there's a quote by an Irish politician called Edmund Burke, and this man lived in the 18th century. And there's a very important quote that's attributed to him. He said, "For evil to flourish, all that is required is that good people do nothing." There's a second quote that he came out with. He said that when bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. Why is this important? It's important particularly now because if you look at the way media is going, the narratives are narrowing to a series of stories and ways in which they are told. And quite prominent people are being kicked off YouTube, Facebook, and places like that. And when you add that to the fact that historically, Black people have always muted their voices, I think it makes things particularly difficult for us as a group. And when that happens, the voices and the authorities that be start to foist voices on us which aren't representative either of the way in which we think or voices that reflect our lived experience. Very good recent example was the story put out effectively by Dr. Tony Sewell in his race equality report, which has been completely pilloried as nearly a work of fiction because he painted a picture of race equality that none of us either lived or recognized here in the United Kingdom. So there's a very good reason. I'm not blaming anybody for muting their voices. Historically, there's been a very good reason. I mean, colonialism, the whole project of colonialism and empire wasn't about giving those colonized people a voice. It was about muting their voice or allowing only that which suited the colonizer, the empire builder, their purposes. It wasn't ever about us telling our truth in our own words, according to our own experience. Nevertheless, what happens when a voice is muted is that it empowers those who would wish to control you. When you don't speak your truth, what they hear is, one, they can live with what we're saying about them. They can live with what we're doing to them. And ergo, let's do some more. Now, if you're happy with what's happening to you now, fine. Then everything is terrific. But if you're unhappy with your circumstances, the inequalities, the injustices, the discriminations that you encounter on a daily basis, then surely it's time to speak up. So, um, I like to go to something that I learned when I was about 8 or 9 years old. It was actually in those days they used to call religious studies, they used to call it divinity. It was my old divinity teacher. She also taught us classics, Latin, in prep school. I must have been 8 or 9 years old. And what Mrs. Jones said, and that I remember it to this day, shows what an impact this lady had on me at that time. And we were talking, it was in a divinity class, and she said that forgiveness requires three things. First, you must recognize that what you did, she was saying, before God, was wrong. Secondly, again, before God, what you did was regretted by you. And thirdly, that to make amends to God and therefore deserve forgiveness, uh, you would have to make recompense. So she called it the 3 R's, and I've never forgotten it to this day. It's recognition, regret, and recompense. Now, because of the way things are panning out in society, because of that faked uh, race disparity report that Dr. Tony Sewell put out, because of the pandemic that is raging around the world, because of the civil liberties that we're finding being curtailed, because of the possibility that we may have some kind of lunge or attempt at a mandated vaccination in contravention of our collective human rights, it is more important now than ever for people to speak up. What's that got to do with forgiveness? You see, if black folk don't expect the society, the wider society around us, A, to recognize the disparities which have become institutionalized, B, to regret their creation, and C, to make recompense, that's the third R, for these disparities that have taken place, there is no way in heaven or hell that they can expect forgiveness, forbearance, or the ability for them and us to move on. And yet I notice all the time that the tendency is for society to expect that somehow we will forget 500 years of colonial history, which of course is arrant nonsense. I mean, it's frankly ridiculous. So for this reason, it is so important that people speak to the deficits that they experience in life. If you don't speak up, your politicians won't listen. If you don't speak up, the media can mute you only to a certain point. But there reaches a point where the reality is so overwhelming that even the media will have to keel over. So this business of the three R's, society's recognition, society's regret, and society's recompense, are driven to a great degree by you, me, people who are like us, unmuting our voices. It's not easy. We haven't been groomed to speak up. Very few black folk have been groomed to speak up. But it is what it is. These are the times in which we live. These are the circumstances that we confront. We have no choice. It's time for you and I to speak up. Thanks very much. I'm going to put this on my YouTube channel, so please hit the subscribe button so that I can share more of these thoughts and other posts with you. Thanks very much for listening.